Okay, Toby, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ashton. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. It's really my pleasure to welcome you, and I can't say enough thank yous and have gratitude for Noga and Ashton for pulling this together and for the coup of getting Benjamin to join us in this conversation. Ashton mentioned it before. This is in commemoration of Memorial Day. And I can't help but think how Memorial Day is one of those special days where people come together to honor those that have passed in service for this country. We're here today to help raise the conversation and the profile, to unveil some of the issues that we encounter in the end of life space when providing care to veterans, and to shed light on the obstacles that may prevent them from accessing these important resources and care options when they are seriously ill. So I'm going to let it go now because Ashton did a great job before, but let me just say that Ashton Stewart is the MJHS Hospice and Palliative Care Veteran Liaison. He's awesome. He's out there all the time, and he cares and he gives with a full heart. And Noga Wellner Kessler is a medical social worker for the Hospice of the East Bay. So this is a cross-country, coast-to-coast program, and we are so grateful that all of you are here. And by the way, Noga served not only in one military, but in a foreign military as well. So thank you both for your service. And Benjamin, thank you for making the time in your busy schedule to join us today. And now I turn it back over to Ashton and Noga.
Thank you so very much, Toby. Ashton Stewart, also Navy veteran for the first Gulf War, and it's such a privilege and an honor to be part of the MJHS team. Before we begin, we just got a couple of housekeeping items to share. For this webinar, the chat and camera features have been disabled for attendees, but that does not mean we don't want to hear from you during this program. We've reserved time at the end for a Q&A towards the end of the program, and we encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A feature anytime during the presentations today. And also, this program will be recorded for those of you unable to join us and to archive for future use. And finally, we have two short polls to share with you, just to ask you to participate. It'll only take a second, just so we can get some insight from you and know a little bit more about you. And then, of course, there will be a short survey that will be distributed after the conclusion of the program. If you just take a moment to give your feedback, that would be very valuable to us as well. Rosie, would you mind launching the Tell Us About Yourself poll, please, just so we can get a little bit more about our audience. And while you're completing this poll, I'd like to thank Rosie Bernard, my colleague and fellow cultural sensitivity liaison, for helping facilitate today's meeting. And I'd also like to thank MJHS and my supervisor, Toby Weiss, for her leadership and unwavering support for veterans and people of all faiths and all backgrounds. Thank you to Hospice East Bay and to the New York State Department of Veteran Services for supporting today's program, and we are honored to be collaborating with you. And finally, we'd also like to thank the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, who launched the We Honor Veterans program in collaboration with the VA. MJHS and Hospice East Bay are proud to be Level 5 partners. And we'd also like to thank TD Bank for your support. And last but not least, just lost my note there, the National Hospice and Healthcare and Hospice Innovation, and the VA itself for your steadfast support for veterans, including your recent update to your mission statement that now acknowledges caregivers and survivors. It was March 16th of this year when the Department of Veteran Affairs announced an updated version of its 1959 mission statement, which now reads, to fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for those who have served in our nation's military and for their families, caregivers, and survivors, which is very meaningful for us who work with caregivers and survivors in the hospice and palliative care field. Now, let me take a moment to introduce you to our panelists, Noga and Benjamin, we are profoundly grateful for joining us today. Noga Wellner Kessler is a veterans coordinator and medical social worker for Hospice East Bay, California. Noga was born in Israel and served in the Israeli Army Medical Corps Mental Health Division in the late 1980s. She received a master's degree in social work in 1994 and spent her career in the social work field, with most of those years in service of veterans and their families. For the past 10 years, she has worked as a hospice social worker and a veterans coordinator, serving veterans and their family members with advanced disease and end-of-life care. She has focused her efforts in developing a program that provides veteran-centered care for identified veterans within the family unit and assists veterans in assessing the benefits and support services available to them. In this effort, NOGA provides trainings in the area of post-traumatic stress symptoms, moral wounding, and traumatic grief, speaking to the importance of identifying veteran status and understanding military culture and the unique issues facing veterans related to the military service, and for many, their combat experiences. NOGA, welcome to the program. We also have Benjamin Pomerantz, Esquire, Deputy Commissioner for the Program Development and Training for the New York State Department of Veterans Services. In this role, Benjamin supervises the division's appellate unit and all of the division's training efforts, serves as the agency's legislative liaison, and leads several of the division's programming initiatives. His work focuses on the advocacy and assistance for veterans, service members, and military families in a wide variety of legal issues, from disability compensation to discharge upgrades to access to healthcare. Benjamin graduated the salutatorian of his class from Albany Law School in 2013, where he founded and directed the school's Veterans Rights Pro Bono Project, for which he received the President's Pro Bono Service Award from the New York State Bar Association. He has also published articles in journals at over a dozen law schools, co-authored a chapter on veterans treatment courts about the intersection between veterans law and mental health services that was published in 2019. And he is a true expert in all things veteran related. Benjamin, welcome to the program. And I would also like to welcome all of you, our attendees, to today's program. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day so we can honor those who have made the ultimate sacrifice, while also recognizing the sacrifices made by veterans who are still with us. Your presence here today shows your commitment to ensure that veterans receive help further upstream rather than as a final mission once they reach hospice when their time is so short. Thank you so much for your compassion and consideration. We'll be offering a few strategies today on how to best support veterans, their caregivers, and loved ones. Topics include service-connected disability, a benefit that can significantly help improve a veteran's life and sometimes provide a surviving spouse and children of the veteran after they pass away. This is one of the many reasons why identifying veteran patients is crucial in the long game. A second consideration is presumptive conditions, which are key to helping veterans who frequently become terminal due to service-connected conditions to help them receive disability compensation. We will highlight the PACT Act, which has made it much more significant. They've made so many significant additions to the list of presumptive conditions, and the importance of the PACT Act cannot be stressed enough to help providers and veterans get ahead of their healthcare needs for the future and current generations of sick veterans. And we tie this all together by explaining how medical nexus letters are crucial to the process, by explaining what they are, why they are important, explain why there is no liability issues for medical providers, how they can help tip the scales in a benefit claims case, and tips on how you can request a medical nexus letter from your veteran's doctor. Rosie, will you please launch the nexus letter poll, just so we can get a sense of how many of you are familiar with medical nexus letters? And while you're taking a minute to answer this polling question, I would like to acknowledge that Memorial Day is just around the corner. And today, so today's program is a commemoration of Memorial Day. It's a day of remembrance that takes place, and its historical roots are right here in the state of New York. Benjamin will share more about that later with a special announcement. But let's just all take a moment, just take a pause in remembrance of all of those who we knew and those who we did not get a chance to meet who succumbed to the ultimate sacrifice. We'll just take a few seconds here. Thank you. Thank you so much. So why did we put this program together? Well, to start, allow me to cite a 2013 article found in the American Journal of Nursing entitled Enhancing Veteran-Centered Care, a Guide for Nurses in Non-VA Settings. Quote, there are currently 22.5 million living US military veterans, and this number is expected to increase dramatically as military personnel return from Iraq and Afghanistan. Although honorably discharged veterans may qualify for health care through the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, only about 25% of all veterans take advantage of this benefit. A majority seek services in non-VA settings. It's imperative for nurses in all civilian care settings to understand the impact that military service has on veterans' health, end quote. Since joining MJHS last year, the number of veteran patients that we see and care for continues to grow, as does the complexity of their needs. Our aging veteran population, in particular Vietnam veterans, face unique challenges. Because of this, they require additional support and planning among public and private healthcare institutions, as well as their caregivers. Since 2010, MJHS has been a member of the We Honor Veterans program, the collaboration between the VA and the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. MJHS and Hospice East Bay are level 5 partners within the We Honor Veterans program. And as such, we've been tasked to mentor other hospices and healthcare providers with the goal to cultivate a veteran-centric culture to ensure that end-of-life care is delivered in alignment with the lived experiences of our veterans. We provide trauma-informed care to ensure caregivers and our staff are equipped with tools to address PTSD and other forms of trauma. Our hospice care team also uses active listening during visits, honors the military service of patients who've served, and encourages families to explore healing together if needed. This can be especially challenging for veterans who have repressed their PTSD, sometimes for decades, only to resurface when the body and mind are weakened due to failing health. In care for individuals with serious illness, we frequently find that veteran patients are disenfranchised, unaware of benefits and services for which they are eligible, as well as experiencing psychosocial obstacles because of their service. We are now understanding that this issue goes well beyond hospice providers and is prevalent throughout the healthcare industry. Our work caring for patients at end of life is incredibly challenging. We encounter far too many veterans who have not enrolled in the VA and who are not receiving compensation for their injuries. Personally, it frustrates me to meet a veteran at the end of life who is dying from service-connected injuries and yet never applied for benefits or sought support from the VA. Our goal today is to provide resources and strategies for healthcare providers to help prolong a veteran's life further upstream. The journey home for many, if not most veterans, has been really hard, and we recognize and honor that. We want to do our part to try to move the needle here by presenting this information to you today in hopes that you will join our campaign to better serve those who served. Let's take a moment to unpack why only a quarter of the veteran population enroll in the VA for healthcare, and ask what we as a healthcare community can do to ensure veterans receive the care they need. In 2018, there was a RAND report that found there's over 800,000 veterans in New York State, the 5th largest veteran population nationally, half of whom were over the age of 65, and only about half are enrolled in the VA. Why? There are significant barriers with a wide range of explanations, from the hero mentality that's indoctrinated into service members during training, to negative experiences that occurred while serving due to combat or the culture of the military itself, to punitive and less than honorable discharges and a general sense of distrust. Furthermore, enrollment in the VA is oftentimes not enough for veterans to know the true extent of what support is available to them, especially when a veteran has not been to the VA in several years. How do we gain the veterans' trust in the VA? Applying for and securing the service-connected rating is a great start. Please note that once a veteran is service-connected, they are not forced to receive their care at the VA. Some have reservations about getting care at the VA, but they don't have to go there after they get service-connected. They can often choose, and often do choose, to get their care at public and private institutions. Again, to highlight the importance and value of a veteran's receiving service connection, they can receive free medical care for the condition that they're service connected for, even with a 0% service connection rating. We'll explain a little bit more about that later, but anything higher than 50% service connected earns you full coverage for all services, including non-service connected injuries. A 30% rating means that you can get additional money and additional compensation for your children. Another consideration is when a veteran enrolls in the VA, they help bring up the numbers of veterans served, meaning there's more financial support from the federal government, which can oftentimes turn into improved equipment and services. And it also helps with data collection to better understand service-connected injuries and conditions. So how do we engage veterans to encourage them to enroll? Sensitivity is required, and the biggest piece of this is how you ask. You don't ask, are you a veteran? It's always much better to say, did you serve? Because just the question, are you a veteran, can oftentimes be triggering, especially those who have an other than honorable or punitive discharge. Vet centers, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge vet centers. They do not care about the character of discharge. If you served only 1 day, or even if you're discharged punitively with a misconduct or dishonorable discharge, they will provide confidential mental health support. We have our Vietnam veterans to thank for bringing vet centers into reality. Vet centers are community-based counseling centers that provide a wide range of social and psychological services, including professional counseling, to eligible veterans, service members, including National Guard and Reserve components, and their families. Vet center counselors and outreach staff, many of whom are veterans themselves, are experienced and prepared to discuss the tragedies of loss, grief, and the transition after trauma. Additionally, New York State is one of 8 states that offers something called the Restoration of Honor. And that's when you have, other than honorable discharge for reasons of sexual identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, or one of 3 mental health conditions, including traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, or PTSD, you can then appeal to the New York State Department of Veterans Services to get upgraded to honorable by the state of New York. That is not only healing for the veteran, it also opens up over 50 veteran benefits offered by the state of New York. And then that could also open or pave the road for them to appeal to the federal government and get their DD 214 upgraded and get more help from the federal government. Another challenge aging veterans face is resurfacing PTSD at the end of life, including mental strain caused by dementia. The rate of PTSD in the veteran population has been found to be double that of the general population, 13% compared to 7%. Veterans with PTSD may be at increased risk for other conditions or problems such as traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, sleep problems, substance use, pain, and other psychiatric disorders, and suicide ideation. More about this will be shared later in the program. In addition to this, the VA is much more open to supporting struggling veterans than they have been in the past. They recognize impacts caused by policies such as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the flip-flopping of the transgender ban, impacts of military sexual trauma, traumatic brain injury, and PTSD, just to give you an example. A lot of veterans who were damaged by one of these examples carries a strong sense of distrust and betrayal. I once worked with a veteran who received an entry-level separation during their basic training, and they were also a victim of military sexual trauma. I assisted this veteran file a service-connected disability claim, and it took a lot for them to start trusting the VA enough to go through with this and pursue this claim. And when it came time for them to have their compensation and pension examination with the VA examiner, I agreed to attend the meeting with the veteran. And during the meeting, the veteran challenged the examiner just because of that strong sense of distrust, saying, how can you possibly understand what happened to me? How have you ever heard of anything like this? And the examiner didn't miss a beat, didn't hesitate for a second, and reassured the veteran, saying, you are not alone. I've heard similar cases, and the VA recognizes what you've been through, and we want to help. It was a very powerful moment. It led to a 70% service connection rating, meaning a substantial monthly tax-exempt payment from the VA, new housing, a full range of healthcare at the VA, and it also led to a new sense of trust for the veteran and a new sense of self-identity as a veteran. It was an incredible healing journey that was 30 years in the making since the time that veteran their enlistment ended. And this all began after the veteran answered, I serve, but I'm not a veteran, to a social worker who referred the case to me. The veteran trusted the social worker enough to give them a glimpse of their military history. And from there, we just started this journey. Again, this emphasizes the importance of staying away from the question, are you a veteran? And asking, did you serve? A second example that I'd like to share is a recent case of a terminally ill patient who served at New River for several years. New River is adjacent to Camp Lejeune, and they shared the same toxic water. The veteran was terminal due to stomach cancer, which is not on the presumptive list for Camp Lejeune cases, but we were able to get a medical nexus letter for this veteran. And up until that point, the veteran service officer helping with the case just kept saying, this condition is not presumptive. I don't know what I can do for them. But we were able to get the medical nexus letter that stated that their stomach cancer was at least as likely as not due to his exposure to the toxic water. And that suddenly changed the playing field. The VSO was a little bit more enthusiastic, a lot more enthusiastic about the case. It's still out there pending. But this is so important. And this could also lead to maybe stomach cancer will be added to the presumptive list if he and other veterans are found to have the same conditions and also served at New River. It's often really hard for veterans to accept these painful military histories as part of their identity, and enrolling in the VA, it's a big deal. It's a big step. That sense of distrust and betrayal, it's strong. And so going into a VA, you're facing it. You're facing your fellow soldiers, but it can also help them overcome this trauma. But it's up to all of us, healthcare providers, social workers, friends, family, caregivers, all of us to help encourage veterans to accept this help from the system that's designed to improve their lives. And we're preparing for today's program. We made cold calls to private and public healthcare systems from California to New York and many states in between, some of the top oncology hospitals in the country. And some of the hospitals we contacted struggled with the question, who works with your veteran population? We were transferred from department to department, from development to care management to social work, but only a fraction of the hospitals we contacted actually have a dedicated point of contact that works with the veteran population. Further, in a committee report from the New York City Council Committee on Veterans from June of last year regarding how New York City's veteran access healthcare, they cited a 2018 RAND Corporation study, the first of its kind, designed to assess the capacity and readiness of healthcare providers to address the service-connected health-related needs among veterans in New York State. The study found that very few of New York State healthcare providers surveyed, barely over 2%, meet the readiness criteria to be able to provide timely, high-quality care to veterans. The RAND study also found that most healthcare providers in New York State know little about military culture or veterans and are unfamiliar with VA initiatives to expand access to community-based care for VA-enrolled veterans. For example, 72% of the New York healthcare providers surveyed did not know how to refer a patient to the VA. Similarly, 1 in 5 reported being aware of the programs within the VA community care network or were engaged in treating VA patients through the programs. Based on the study's findings, the RAND Corporation issued a set of recommendations to help improve the readiness of healthcare providers across the state, and that is what we are doing here today. Most of what we're talking about is part of that list that RAND put together. We will be sharing some of the resources with the attendees today as part of the program. We'll send out a link to the recording. All of it's going to be coming to you, including our contact information. We are here to support you. We hope that you will continue this quest to support your veteran population. We're here to answer questions today and beyond today. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to now turn it over to Noga.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Before getting started, I would like to share what I believe is the central mission, the takeaway today, and that is the critical importance of identifying veteran status upstream within the community healthcare environment in primary care, clinics, and hospitals. So in coming together as a community for veterans and their families, we have an opportunity to honor through understanding of the issues facing veterans and the possible obstacles and challenges that many of our veterans and their families must navigate through. So today we honor those veterans who are no longer with us. We want to look at the challenges as well as the successes and share both of them as we learn together about how to best care for our veteran patients. Over the years, I've had an opportunity to care for a growing number of our veteran patients with advanced disease and at end of life. Last year, 2022, over 50% of all our male patients in our hospice care had served in the military, the majority in times of war. The highest percentage were our Korean War veterans, 33%, with our Vietnam era veterans as close second at 26%, and our World War II veterans at 19%. A growing number of our veteran patients, primarily from the Vietnam era, come to us with complex issues and service-connected comorbidities, and often with one or more presumptive health conditions due to exposure to chemical toxins such as Agent Orange. And a vast majority of our veteran patients come to us from the community and not the VA. And for a large percentage of them, their veteran status has not been identified through their healthcare providers. Without identified veteran status in the primary care, hospitals, and clinic settings, veterans' service-connected injuries and illnesses will not be identified, presumptive health conditions due to exposure to chemical toxins while in military service will be missed, and opportunities to provide the best possible veteran-centered care and support for these veterans may be lost. At this time, I would like to share with you two stories of two Vietnam combat veterans who I've had the opportunity to meet and assist while they were on our hospice care. And as we know, many of our veterans are fighters. Their efforts to stay in the fight, despite the challenges of advanced disease, often remain strong until the very end of the progression of their illnesses. And for many, these illnesses are complex with numerous comorbidities. The first story is that of a Vietnam Combat Air Force captain who served in the Air Force from 1963 to 1967 with one tour in Vietnam. Our veteran was 100% service-connected with 3 identified presumptive health conditions due to exposure to Agent Orange: ischemic heart disease, multiple myeloma, and type 2 diabetes. Our veteran also had hypertension and bone cancer. Our veteran came to us from a community hospital here in California and had also been receiving much of his specialized care through the VA hospital in Palo Alto, California, and the outpatient clinic in Livermore. Per his spouse, both the VA and the clinic, as well as the hospital, were aware of our patient's military history and medical history and shared medical records as needed to coordinate his care. Our veteran was also receiving compensation for his presumptive health conditions and as an actively enrolled veteran in the Veteran Health Administration, had the resources and support services available through his VA primary care doc as well. So this included home health aid hours, 20 a week as requested, as well as an option for respite for his spouse and placement at an inpatient hospice unit in the VA, as well as placement at a VA contracted facility if he chose. Our patient had burial benefits available to him, as well as all the military honors at time of burial. And his spouse was eligible for survivor benefits, the dependency indemnity compensation following his passing. Our second story is about a Vietnam Combat Navy veteran who served 4 years in the Navy, with 1 year and 9 months in foreign service, including Vietnam, with 2 weeks on the riverboats with Brownwater Navy. Following his service in the Navy, he served in the Coast Guard Reserves for 30 years and retired with rank of Master Chief. Our veteran was awarded a First National Defense Service Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, and a Combat Action Ribbon. Our Navy veteran was receiving care from a community hospital. He had never enrolled in the Veteran Health Administration nor received any benefits or services from the VA. Our patient's veteran status had not been identified throughout through his healthcare providers, nor in the community hospital where he received his care. Our patient was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, the B-cell type, a presumptive health condition. And that was in 2016. And was diagnosed with bladder cancer in 2021, another presumptive health condition as well. Not having identified his veteran status when diagnosed or at any time throughout his care, his 2 conditions were not noted as service-connected, and patient did not receive assistance in applying for compensation for his 2 presumptive health conditions. Patient had not enrolled in the Veteran Health Administration, so was not receiving the additional assistance available to him for veterans in general and for Vietnam combat veterans more specifically. When he came onto our hospice care in 2023, he and his family did not have the additional caregiving support and resources that would have provided much needed assistance and respite for them, and opportunities were lost. Since then, I've begun to assist our patient with applying for compensation for his presumptive health condition. Our veteran will most likely not live to see the compensation claim granted. His spouse will be his substitute claimant for any accrued benefits, and as his surviving spouse, will receive dependency indemnity compensation as well to support her. When we look at obstacles and challenges to care, we need to look at the veteran's awareness and acceptance of the support available, with trust being the central focus. And we need to look at our understanding in the healthcare environment. our understanding of the importance of identifying veteran status, as well as our knowledge and understanding of the benefits and services that may be available for our veterans and their families. One particular area of importance as it relates to service connection is that of the prevalence of psychological wounds of war, such as post-traumatic stress symptoms, in veterans who now, years later, face advanced disease and end of life. As many veterans are often non-disclosing when addressing trauma and emotional pain, these invisible wounds may not be shared with healthcare providers and therefore not diagnosed. And these combat-related injuries may be unreported, underreported, or misdiagnosed. Among veterans whose post-traumatic stress symptoms were reported and diagnosed, the prevalence of post-traumatic stress has been estimated at around 17% for returning Iraq War and Afghanistan War veterans. For Vietnam veterans, it is estimated 20 to 30%, with a prevalence of a lifetime of combat-related post-traumatic stress symptoms. And in studies of our older World War II and Korean War veterans, the prevalence has been found to remain as high as 12% for over 45 years following combat. Studies have also shown that veterans who suffered from post-traumatic stress symptoms following their military service were twice as likely to develop cognitive decline than those who did not develop post-traumatic stress as a result of their military service. Cognitive impairment may increase the difficulty of repressing or avoiding painful memories. It may challenge the ability to inhibit intrusive thoughts or to focus thoughts elsewhere. Suppressing, compartmentalizing, or denying the trauma and the presenting symptoms may become too difficult with increased cognitive decline. Studies have shown that post-traumatic stress symptoms can evolve and resurface and present after periods of many years where a veteran appears symptom-free, and suffering associated with post-traumatic stress is often concealed and not talked about within the culture of the military and within the veteran community. With cognitive decline, as well as poor health and increased weakness, a resurfacing or intensifying of symptoms may occur that were previously hidden and managed, perhaps for a lifetime, for our veterans. Combat-related post-traumatic stress symptoms, as well as other psychological wounds, are service-connected wounds. These are wounds of war. If veteran status is not identified and military history and experience is not known, then these injuries will be missed, and opportunities to provide the best possible veteran-centered care will be lost. So what can we do? Identify veteran status from initial contact with healthcare providers in primary care settings and throughout within the community healthcare system. Identify military service, including branch and era of service. Ask if a veteran is in possession of his or her discharge papers. Do they have their DD Form 214? And do they need assistance if they don't? Ask if a veteran is enrolled in the Veteran Health Administration, and provide information on the support and services that may be available as an actively enrolled veteran. It may include primary and specialized care, including mental health care for possible service-connected trauma or psychological wounding. It may also include home health aid assistance through caregiver support hours ordered by the VA primary care physician to assist in the day-to-day care of our veteran patients. In addition to caregiving support, respite for the primary caregiver may be available, as well as options for placement at a VA contracted facility. Other programs that may be available include home-based primary care for housebound patients, housebound veterans. This program offers a mobile primary care team that provides healthcare services to veterans who are housebound, have physical and functional impairment, and complex disease. It includes an interdisciplinary team of physicians, nurse practitioners, RNs, social workers, occupational therapists, dietitians, psychologists, and more. Veteran-centered care also includes having the knowledge of what illnesses or injuries may be service-connected and which may be presumptive health conditions due to exposure to chemical toxins. It means connecting veterans to medical doctors that may assist them in identifying their service-connected illnesses and presumptive health condition. And it means assisting veterans in connecting with their county veteran service offices to apply for compensation claims, or if veterans are of low income, to apply for pension with aid and attendance to support and assist them in their day-to-day care. It also includes providing every veteran patient with the information needed regarding burial benefits and military honors that may be available to our veterans and their spouses in honor of their service and sacrifices made through military service. In turn, providing veteran-centered care means honoring our veterans through understanding of the issues they face, as well as support and resources that may be available to them as veterans and to their family members. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noga. That was very moving. It's a testament to the amazing work that you're doing at Hospice East Bay as a fellow veteran. We will talk more, but now we're going to give the microphone over to Benjamin Pomerantz, who's going to share some insight into Nexus letters, PACT Act, and some other, with an exciting announcement in the middle of that too. So the floor is yours, Mr. Pomerantz.
Thank you very much, Ashton. Thank you very much for the chance to be part of this today. For all the veterans who are with us, first and foremost, thank you for your service, not just words backed by action. And for all the military families, we know that you serve too. Thank you for your service. And lastly, but never least, for everyone who is here from the hospice care community, thank you for your service. The work that you do is nothing short of heroic. I've had many friends and loved ones in my life who have received hospice care, and the care that they have received has been nothing short of extraordinary. So thank you for the work that you do. Let me start by giving you all my email address. So that way, in case you want to take a nap for the next 20 minutes or so while I drone on, you're welcome to do that. Hopefully you won't, but if you do and you have questions later on, my email with our New York State Department of Veteran Services is Benjamin, BENJAMIN, .Pomerantz, POMERANCE, at veterans, VETERANS.NY.gov. So Benjamin.Pomerantz at veterans.ny.gov. Please do not be shy to reach out to me. I already have some homework that's going to be coming from today based on some comments and questions that have been posed, which is great. That's the purpose of these gatherings, right? To find out more about what's going on and how we can be of service. Our agency, just for some brief background, has been around since 1945. I personally have not been there since 45, but the agency has been. And recently we had a renaming of our agency from the State Division of Veteran Services to the State Department of Veteran Services, which means that the mission that we have engaged with for the past 75 plus years not only continues, but is even strengthened in serving veterans and military families, definitely including caregivers of veterans throughout New York State in every possible way that we can. One of the great collaborations that we're honored to have is with MJHS on many levels and throughout many programs, initiatives, etc. And that's what brings me here today. And as Ashton said, we're on the doorstep of Memorial Day, a day which began quite literally in New York State as far as this tradition of honoring those who have given everything in service to this country. It began in a small community called Waterloo. Waterloo is in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, and there was a local drugstore owner in 1865, Henry C. Wells, who said we should do something to better honor those who have made the ultimate sacrifice in the Civil War. And initially, no one really paid attention. And he was a persistent individual. The next year, he came back and said, we should do this. And this time, he enlisted the assistance of a retired Civil War general who was living in that community of Waterloo. And General John B. Murray and Henry C. Wells that year in 1866 went out. They marshaled the support of veterans and their families in their area. They created a local citizens committee, which they headed. And on May 5th, 1866, they decorated the village with flags at half-mast, draped with evergreens and mourning black. And that began a tradition of honor that continues through this day. A century after that, the United States Congress recognized Waterloo as being the place Memorial Day began. And this year, Memorial Day, near to Waterloo in Romulus, New York, we will be dedicating and honoring a Memorial Day in New York State's first ever state veteran cemetery, the State Veteran Cemetery, Finger Lakes, on the hallowed grounds that many people know from their military days as the Sampson Naval Air Training Station. And this has been something that many people throughout New York State, including some of you who I see in the attendee list here, have advocated for quite some time. And thanks to your advocacy and our ability to collaborate with you in that advocacy, that has at last come to fruition with this first state veteran cemetery in New York's history. So thank you for the advocacy that has led to that. And I mention that in part here because this shows that we're in a field where things tend to be marathons, not sprints. And the work of change in which we are all engaged often does not happen overnight. And my encouragement to everyone here, like Henry Wells in Waterloo, New York in 1865, like all of you in 2023 and the years leading up to 2023 in New York State who pushed for a state veteran cemetery, whatever it is that you feel is important and that you have a heartfelt conviction needs to be done to better conditions for those who served and for their families. Don't be shy, please, ever about standing forward and advocating and playing the long game, because that's what's needed to get these things done. The topics that Ashton asked me to talk about today focus on many of these different areas where I feel it's important to have even more allies in the fight. And so I'm going to talk about a variety of things, jumping around in a bunch of different topics. And at some point, if I start talking too long, Ashton will give me the graceful hook and I will stop. But the first thing that's on the agenda here for the topics we've been looking at is medical nexus letters, okay? And I want to start with a brief story. And the brief story kind of builds upon what Ashton said and what Noga said about the importance of collaborations in this space with the medical care community in New York State and across the entire country. The story's about 6 years old now, I think, and it took place in Albany, New York. And at a veterans legal clinic, I met a gentleman who asked me why he was not getting any access to disability compensation benefits. And then he talked about his service. And yes, he absolutely had current disabling conditions that were at least as likely as not caused by and made worse by his military service. And so it certainly seemed like he should have been getting disability compensation. And so I started to ask more about why he felt he should be getting the disability compensation that he was not in fact getting. And he said at one point, well, I go to this particular VA medical center and I assume that they're the ones who would take care of all this for me, right? And that's, of course, when we had the conversation around the fact that when we talk about the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, it's not one monolithic entity. It's three separate entities, right? You have the Veterans Health Administration, which is separate from the Veterans Benefits Administration, which is separate from the National Cemetery Administration. And so just because he was receiving medical care at a Veterans Health Administration facility did not inherently mean someone there was going to go out and file a claim for disability compensation for him with the Veterans Benefits Administration. But wouldn't it be nice, right? Wouldn't it be in the perfect world model where there was greater connectivity among all of these various arms, be it in the VA, be it in the private sector, be it everywhere? Just as Noga said, asking the questions, knowing where to go, knowing who to talk to, knowing, okay, if we're not going to file a claim for disability compensation ourselves, who can we refer this person to in our local area of operations who can do this work? That's the goal. That's the shared mission that I think we all have that brings us here today, of increasing that connectivity and finding ways to get this job done. So this person, who, by the way, was 65 years removed from his last day in military uniform, would have to walk into a veterans law clinic saying, I have no idea why I'm not getting my benefits that I should be getting. All right, that greater connectivity is what helps prevent that story from happening. And one of the ways that that story can be helped greatly by the medical community is through the writing of what's called medical nexus letters. When we talk about medical nexus letters, what we're talking about is a key component in the establishment of a claim for disability compensation. As you think about disability compensation for veterans who have been injured or become ill through the military service, you want to think about the establishment of this claim as if it were the construction of a stool with 3 legs, where all 3 legs have to be sturdy for that stool to stand upright, okay? One of those legs is obvious, military service, right? That's what begins the whole conversation. Secondly, a current disabling condition that is affecting that veteran. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, a nexus or a connection between that veteran's current disabling condition and their military service. Again, all 3 of those legs have to be proven for the VA to award a claim of disability compensation benefits to a applicant veteran. And oftentimes when we think about disability compensation, there's some misconceptions about the threshold that is required to prove those cases. Not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not like Law and Order or anything else that we see on TV when it comes to criminal law. It's not clear and convincing evidence. It's not preponderance of the evidence. In fact, it is a far more lenient standard than any of these. The standard of review that the VA utilizes in deciding these cases is at least as likely as not. Is this medical condition, this current disabling condition, something that was at least as likely as not caused by or made worse by this veteran's military service, okay? At least a 50% likelihood. That's what we're talking about here. And again, this often comes as a surprise to a medical community that is used to standards like medical certainty. Likewise, to the legal community, if we're used to things like beyond a reasonable doubt or preponderance of the evidence, it comes as a surprise there. And what this all boils down to is that when the VA was created, way back in the day, it was designed by Congress to be a proclaimant, non-adversarial system, doing whatever it could on behalf of the veterans and their families. This is part of that structure, okay? This is part of that structure to try and grant benefits whenever possible to veterans who have served this country and in the context of disability compensation, become injured or ill because of that service. So why are these letters so important? Why can't the VA adjudicators just take a package of medical records and look through those and say, yep, that's good enough? Well, theoretically they could. Right? Theoretically, that would be sufficient to say, okay, here's the records, and that's enough to show that there is this connection here between this current disabling condition and military service. But now let's put theory aside for a second and talk about practice. First of all, as human beings, we're storytelling beings. What does that mean? It sounds kind of like vague stuff, right? Well, what I mean by that is we all like stories. We all learn from stories. We all have an affinity for stories and storytelling and story reading, right? Be it books, theater, music, whatever it is. We have this affinity to stories, to narratives, being given a beginning, a middle, and an end that takes us somewhere. And that's something that we, especially when the we includes people who are not medical professionals, and we have to remember that when we talk about the VA adjudicators, they are not themselves necessarily medical professionals. If you're looking at a stack of medical records that's this thick, or even this thick, or this thick, it can be difficult to discern the story within all of those records. Far easier to discern the story in a well-crafted medical nexus letter that says, in my medical judgment, based on my experience, my expertise in the field, in my opinion, it is at least as likely as not the fact that this veteran had a medical condition or has a medical condition that was caused by or made worse by their in-service experiences. And then goes on from there to provide the most important parts of the nexus letter, the rationale, okay, the statement as to why that medical professional, based on their experience, based on their expertise, believes that this connection exists. Far easier for the VA to look at that and say, okay, now I see the story. Now I understand the narrative, and now I know what to look for when I go through that nice thick package of medical records And that can make the difference, and that does make the difference time and time and time again between a successful outcome in a claim and an unsuccessful outcome where the veteran then has to appeal the decision and wait a longer time period for the case to be granted in their favor. Also, when we talk about medical nexus letters, one of the important things here is to provide expertise. I mentioned before that people who adjudicate these cases at the VA do not have to be medical experts themselves. And so oftentimes when they're just looking at the medical records, there's terminology used there that they might not know what the terminology means, okay? And so as you'll see in the documents that are shared with you, one of those documents talks about what the VA looks for in a medical nexus letter. A letter that is written in plain language, plain English, that does not just use the jargon that a medical professional would understand, but rather talks about, okay, here's what this term means, or here's what this acronym means, or this phrase means, boiled down to plain English. That helps the VA adjudicator along as well, and gives them a smoother glide path to hopefully find in the veteran's favor. Again, that can be the difference between a successful outcome or one that the veteran then has to appeal and wait longer to have the benefits granted for them, okay? Providing those plain English, plain language explanations of what certain terms mean, what certain phrases mean, what certain medical conclusions mean. And it provides that from somebody who is an expert in their fields, saying, yes, I have the background, I have the authority, if you will, to make a reasoned, informed judgment on this, that yes, this is at least as likely as not a medical condition linked to what this veteran experienced in military service. Lastly, one final piece of importance is medical nexus letters are useful to not just talk about the connection between military service and the current disabling condition, but to also talk about symptoms, talk about severity. Because when the VA rates these decisions, when they make their decisions on a claim, if they decide, okay, service connection has been established here, right? This veteran has a medical condition that was at least as likely as not caused by or made worse by their service, their next step is to say, how severe is that condition? What is the impact on this veteran's life? What is the impact on this veteran's ability to be employed? And what's their earning potential impact? What's the impact on their family life? All these things become part of the equation. And a medical professional writing a high quality nexus letter can put that down, again, in plain English on paper, saying, based on my observation, based on my treatment, based on my review, whatever, of this veteran, here's what I've observed about the severity of what this veteran is going through from this condition that is linked to their military service. And that can make the difference between a veteran getting, say, a 10% rating versus, let's say, the 50% rating that they deserve for the medical condition or the series of medical conditions that this veteran is experiencing. So anybody out here, there is plenty of room on this bus. Anybody out here in the medical community that wants to do something on behalf of veterans here in New York State or beyond, because this need is nationwide, writing medical nexus letters is that thing for veterans who come to you for regular service as a patient, or even for veterans who come to you and say, would you do a consultation with me? Would you do a medical workup or a review or even a records review? Provide that opinion is worth its weight in gold for veterans who are seeking disability compensation and for veterans who are seeking at the same time the ancillary corresponding benefits that go with it. Things like access to VA healthcare. Because if you have a disability compensation rating, as Ashton told you earlier, that can lead to medical care without copays through the VA system, right? Makes a tremendous difference in that veteran's life, in their health, in their well-being. And that act of writing that good quality nexus letter can change that veteran's life in so many ways. I saw a hand from Ashton. Do you have
I
a
do.
comment to chime in with? Yeah.
I do.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you so much. I hate to interrupt, but
Please.
one of the things
No,
that has come up with me in requesting medical nexus letters is liability concerns from the providers. Could you help demystify that for us?
Definitely. Yes. So one common concern, and you'll see this spelled out too in the document that Ashton will send around to you, is, okay, if I write this letter, what comes next? Am I going to be hailed into court in some federal courtroom, who knows where, and be told to go in the witness box and raise my right hand and testify under oath and be cross-examined about the contents of my letter from some federal government lawyer? No, the answer is no, right? The good news is no, that will not happen. Your letter stands on its own merits, okay? If you draft a nexus letter for a veteran and you render your medical opinion in that letter, that stands on its own 2 feet. That goes in as part of the veteran's claim package to the VA. They review it at face value. And that's it as far as your involvement with that case. You don't have to go into court and testify and be cross-examined or anything else like that, okay? And I know that a lot of people, as Ashton said, are skittish about writing these because they are concerned that, hey, this may be the next step, and you do not have to worry about that happening. I've worked in this space now for 9.5 years. Knock on wood, I've never seen that happen. I do not think I ever will see that happen, okay? Again, the VA is meant to be a proclaimant, non-adversarial system. The way Title 38 of the U.S. Code is written is the VA is instructed by Congress, by federal law, to look for ways to grant a claim. And so when they get your medical nexus letter that paves the road for them to understand that big stack of medical records better and to see where that nexus or that connection is between a veteran's current disabling condition and their military service, they are glad to receive that. Okay, they're not going to be adversarial towards you. They're going to be glad to receive that because that helps them do their job of running a pro-veteran, pro-claimant, non-adversarial system, and helps them understand why that claim on a medical expert's basis should be granted. So the liability piece, the am I going to be called into court piece, that is not something that you have to worry about with a medical nexus letter. Let me shift gears to a couple of the things. The PACT Act, Ashton mentioned that in his intro. Just briefly, that was signed into law last August 10th, 2022 by President Biden. And this has been, as many of you already know, a game changer in the veteran services space. For example, when we talk about presumptive conditions, the idea of the nexus between military service and a current disabling condition being presumed because the veteran was in a certain place at a certain time. Tremendous strides were made with that in a couple of different areas through the PACT Act. One of them was burn pits, okay? Burn pit exposure. The idea of, yes, when you're next to a big open pit into which all kinds of things from dead animals to live ordnance to human excrement to you name it was dumped at once and lit on fire, breathing in those fumes is not so good. That's been suspected for a very long time. The post 9/11 generation of veterans has certainly fought this, as have the veterans of the first Gulf War fought this. And finally, with the PACT Act, the lawmaking caught up with what everyone thought all along, that, yeah, these fumes have consequences. And so now we see as presumptive conditions for individuals who served in the Middle East and were exposed to those burn pits, things like asthma, things like sinusitis, things like rhinitis, a whole host, unfortunately, of different cancers, from brain cancer to reproductive cancer to lymphatic cancer to throat cancer to the list goes on. And these are conditions that many people, many veterans, when they have these diagnoses, do not inherently think, oh, I bet that's because I served in the Middle East and I was near the burn pits, right? And so in the medical community, one other way that you can provide great assistance is to keep that in the back of your mind, or even in the forefront of your mind. And so when you do what Noga suggests, what Ashton suggests, and ask, have you served? And the answer is yes, and you find out more about their service, and you realize, let's say hypothetically, that they were in the Middle East, they were exposed to those burn pits, that can now open the door to a screening around, hey, do you have any of these things that are on this presumptive list, right? Camp Lejeune was mentioned as well, same deal, right? Any individuals who are at Camp Lejeune for at least 30 days of service between 1953 and 1987. That's a long time frame, okay? And all we're looking at is just 30 days of service at Lejeune at any point during that time frame. There are conditions that are now presumed to be linked to that toxic water exposure at Camp Lejeune, or, as Ashton said, at the adjoining station, New River. What kind of conditions do we have there? Things like Parkinson's disease, kidney cancer, liver cancer, leukemia. Again, things that people might not think, oh, I bet I have leukemia because I was at Camp Lejeune for 30 days in 1957. No, they're not going to probably think that. But you as a medical professional, armed with that knowledge, will have the ability now to screen for those types of things. And if you see that connection, that's a signal that, hey, let's get this individual to a veteran service officer, to someone who can file that claim for them to get what they should be getting in terms of benefits, in terms of health care, all the related opportunities for them in that regard. And then Agent Orange, which we've all probably kind of heard about, but the PACT Act changed the playing field here as well. Because for a long time, the belief, kind of a strange belief, I thought, was that Agent Orange was in Vietnam, which it was. Agent Orange was used by the U.S. military in Vietnam, very effective at getting rid of jungle foliage, also very effective at getting people sick with a number of conditions, okay? But the belief for a long time was Agent Orange was in Vietnam, and there it was. And it got to the border of Vietnam, and it stopped, right? That's not quite how it worked. And the PACT Act and a preceding act as well called the Blue Water Navy Act recognized that yes, if you were on a ship that was within 12 nautical miles of the Vietnam coastline, you were presumed now to be exposed to Agent Orange. And the PACT Act took that one step further and said, okay, if you were in certain adjoining countries or even non-adjoining countries where Agent Orange was used, you're presumed to have that exposure as well if you served there during the years of the Vietnam War. What places are we talking about? Places like Thailand, places like Laos, places like the Korean demilitarized zone where Agent Orange was stored in abundance, places like Guam, places like the Johnston Island or Johnston Atoll, American Samoa, places that you might not inherently think of in the category of in Vietnam. But yes, there was Agent Orange there during the Vietnam War, and the PACT Act that was signed last August recognizes that exposure. And again, here's the conditions, right? What kinds of conditions are now presumed by the VA to be caused by that Agent Orange exposure? Well, things like type 2 diabetes, conditions like ischemic heart disease, which commonly gets referred to as clogged arteries, right? Conditions like prostate cancer, conditions like Parkinson's disease, conditions like lung cancer, bladder cancer, hypothyroidism. Again, being a broken record here, but the point is hopefully clear by now. These are conditions that many people will not say, oh, I bet I have this because I served in Vietnam. Oh, I bet I have this because I was stationed at a base in Guam during the qualifying time frame. Or I bet I have this because I was at an air base in Thailand during the qualifying time. No, they're probably not going to think that way. But you as the medical provider, armed with that knowledge, you'll be able to help that veteran understand, hey, you know, this diagnosis, because you served in one of these areas during the Vietnam War, did you realize you are presumed to have been exposed to Agent Orange? And did you realize the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs presumes that this condition that you have now is because of that exposure to Agent Orange, right? And that can be a game changer for them as far as compensation, healthcare, and other related benefits. Now, one challenge that veterans face, and this is kind of circling between this theme and the Nexus letter theme again, is what I've started referring to as the cottage industry of medical Nexus letters. I mentioned before the importance of expertise in this field and having the authority to say, this is why I'm making this medical opinion about this individual's medical condition. There is a cottage industry that has sprung up nationwide because these medical Nexus letters are so important and so highly valued and prized toward being successful in a disability compensation claim. And I want to be very clear and careful in what I'm saying here. Medical professionals, okay, their time is extremely valuable. And I am not saying in any way that it is not, okay? And a qualified medical professional who goes out and they take their time and they use their expertise to examine a veteran and render a medical opinion about that veteran's diagnosis and length of service, and they charge a reasonable fee for that. I'm okay with that. Here's where I have issues. I have seen over the past several years, the past 4 or 5 years especially, far too many Nexus letters being written by people who are out there charging significant fees. Okay, I'm talking sometimes $5,000 or $6,000, sometimes even more, who do not have expertise in the field. And they sort of bring the veterans in and they say, yeah, we'll write you a letter. Yeah, give us what's going on here. Give us your medical file. We'll write you a letter. And they write a letter which sometimes amounts to little more, and I'm being quite literal here, than a cut and paste from WebMD or Wikipedia, and sometimes both, okay? And I mean that literally. There have been a couple of occasions where I've said, this just seems really disjointed. I don't quite buy this letter, right? And I will go and I will feed a couple of lines that seem a little bit odd to me from that letter into Google, and sure enough, I find the exact same text on Wikipedia, on WebMD, or on some other sites of that nature. That is not helpful, okay? If I can see through that, the VA adjudicators can definitely see through that. And what happens in those situations is veterans wind up actually losing money on the deal, okay? That letter will likely not be helpful for them in getting their claim decided in their favor, because the VA can say, yeah, I can tell this was not written by somebody who has expertise in this space. So we're not going to use that to help the claim get granted, all right? And the veterans paid money already out of pocket to have this letter done. So now the veteran has lost thousands of dollars on an effort to try and get benefits earned by virtue of their military service, which hopefully we all can agree together is just not a good outcome. And that is why, one more time, it's so important to have people who are bona fide experts in these various fields being the ones who draft these letters and render highly informed opinions on the veteran's behalf around the connection between that condition and military service, and also the severity of that condition, okay? And as one last corollary to that, it's okay to say no. What I mean by that is if a veteran comes to you and they say, I want you to write a letter on my behalf, and you review the file and you realize there's not sufficient evidence here to say it is at least as likely as not. There's not enough to say it's at least 50% likelihood that it was caused by service. It's okay to tell a veteran that, okay? Don't feel like you're pressured to violate your own medical ethical standards in writing these letters. I'm not saying that at all. But for the veterans who you realize deserve that letter, deserve that informed opinion that says, yes, this connection exists, it's at least as likely as not. These are the veterans for whom your services are tremendously and extraordinarily needed each and every day in New York State and across the entire country. Let me pause there. I'll turn the mic back to Ashton. We have more we can talk about for sure, but I know we have some great questions coming in, so we'll take some time to address those. Ashton, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. As always, your knowledge and expertise in this is very appreciated. I just want to also highlight that these people who are putting these Nexus letters together in the cottage industry, the VA does not go after them for liability issues. And if they don't get prosecuted or persecuted or even a phone call from the VA, it seems like a real legit writer of a Nexus letter would not either. I think that's sort of case in point with the alleviating that concern that providers sometimes share. I don't know how to express that differently, a little bit more higher level to a doctor, but hopefully they will listen to that. We have had some really interesting questions come in and in the chat. I'll just read one right here. Is there a way to fast track this service connection for patients who are on hospice? A barrier I experience is veterans who are now on hospice, and I am trying to educate on service connection. Now there is really a tight time frame, and the process to initiate is so time consuming. Certainly something that we can relate to. I'll let you take this just because I think you're more eloquent with this. Is that okay, Benjamin?
Sure, I'd be happy to take it. The short answer is yes, absolutely. There are categories that are listed in Title 38 of the U.S. Code and correspondingly Title 38 of the Code of Federal Regulations that say these claims get expedited, these claims get heard first. And one of those categories is individuals, veterans, who are terminally ill, okay? Veterans and also spouses of veterans. So if your patient is a veteran surviving spouse and you're filing for a benefit for them, that should get fast-tracked if they are terminally ill. Also, individuals of advanced age, defined as age 85 or above. Those cases are required to get fast-tracked. Veterans who are homeless, those cases are required by federal law to be fast-tracked by the VA. Veterans who are experiencing a mental health crisis in their life where they're reporting heightened suicidal ideation, those cases are to be fast-tracked by the VA. So absolutely yes. Here's the key, okay, and this key too often gets missed. The VA is not clairvoyant, okay? The VA is not, what is it, Miss Cleo or whomever. So there's no crystal ball in Washington, D.C., which says, oh, okay, this client or this claimant is someone who is in hospice care. The VA is not going to know that unless you tell them, okay? So when that claim goes downstream to the VA, you want to have with that claim documentation that shows, hey, this is a veteran who is terminally ill, okay? And therefore, we are requesting that this case be fast-tracked. And then it'll be flagged in the system for advanced review or expedited review by the VA, and they will fast-track it. But they do not know it unless you tell it to them. I have had veterans through the years who have come to me and to my colleagues who have said, you know, I filed this claim and I'm 87 years old. I'm past the age 85 threshold for the age-based advancing on the docket. How come the VA is not fast-tracking it? You have to really spell it out to make sure the VA knows you want this claim to be fast-tracked. So yes, it can, but we got to make sure that they see it and they know it. So they know it right up front, okay, this case is put on the fast track.
Thank you so much. There's another question from an anonymous attendee. Must a denial letter have been issued by the VA on a claim prior to a nexus letter being generated, or is it prudent to submit a nexus letter along with the original claim? I say with the original claim. Fully developed claims are something that's very important. The more information you can provide for the adjudicator, the better. And they always defer to a medical professional in cases that are as least as likely as not connected to service connection. Benjamin, would you like to put the dots and cross the T's on that?
Yeah, I agree 1,000%, Ash. And to me, there's never a reason to wait. If you can get the evidence, if you can get the medical nexus letter, put that in with your initial claim, right? Why wait to have the VA potentially deny it? Get it in there, give the VA a chance to see it and review it and hopefully render that good decision in your favor up front, as opposed to waiting to see if they deny it first. Give it to them, give them all the evidence you have, give them all the good stuff you have of why the claim should be granted, and that will hopefully be utilized for a good outcome sooner as opposed to later.
Thank you so much. I see that there's also, I'm not sure which question you're asking about, Janine Ferrari, but there is another question here, a little different from the Nexus letters about the VA rehab grant to redo your home. Somebody's asking, can you take advantage of the VA rehab grant to redo your home as well as an outside fundraiser? They need assistance in helping a peacetime disabled veteran friend who has her home, but she's tried to do it herself, is unable to handle the cost and is now homeless, sleeping on the couch of her boyfriend. They really need help. She suffers from PTSD, isn't currently depressed. She's worried about her. Is there anything that we can offer here as far as advice?
First of all, that's a terrible situation. I'm sorry that
Certainly.
that's going on, first and foremost. There's a couple of different VA adaptive housing grant programs, which have extremely exacting criteria. Primarily, they are for individuals who have suffered catastrophic conditions involving the loss of or loss of use of a limb, or individuals who are now legally blind related to the military service, or a condition of that nature. I'm trying to think offhand. I can't think of a VA adaptive housing grant program that is focused specifically on PTSD. Perhaps there should be, but I can't think of one offhand that focuses on that particular condition. If you have further details and you want to talk with me offline, though, I'd certainly welcome that. Please email me. Again, it's benjamin.pomerantz@veterans.ny.gov, especially if you're here in New York State, because sometimes there are some state programs beyond the VA that we can look at. So please, if you'd like, reach out to me and we can talk in much greater detail about this.
I would encourage everyone to keep posting in the Q&A for questions. I received a couple through email as well. Here's one. I've heard that Service Connection is available for so much more than in the past. Can you please elaborate?
Yes, it is, and that's a good thing. And I'll give one particular area that I think has been really improved well by Congress and also by the VA, and that's the area of mental health. When I first began working in this space, there was I won't say a barrier, but definitely a divide that existed between combat veterans and non-combat veterans when it came to how the VA looked at mental health conditions, be it post-traumatic stress, be it clinical depression, be it general anxiety disorder, et cetera. Where if you had served in combat, there was a significantly higher chance of getting that claim developed and decided than if you were a non-combat veteran. And I have thankfully seen that change through the years, okay? Where now there's an understanding, and rightfully so, that trauma can occur at any point in the military service. It is not just confined to a combat theater, okay? Trauma comes in many forms. It can exist in many places, and certainly non-combat veterans, as well as combat veterans, can experience in-service trauma and can be granted compensation, rightfully so, for that. Correspondingly to that has been a better understanding about evidence as it relates to trauma cases. And I'll give one particular example here, and that's military sexual trauma, where for many, many years, these cases were routinely denied. Why? Because the service medical records didn't say anything about a report of sexual assault or sexual harassment. There was nothing they could find about a report to the chain of command about assault or harassment, and so the VA would deny the case. And that has changed in very important ways. Right now, okay, and one of the best changes I've seen in the VA's own regulations, in Title 38, Section 3.304 of the Code of Federal Regs, it makes it very clear that you can use what are called markers to help to win these cases, even when the military records themselves do not have any helpful information. What are markers? Markers are any type of change in attitude or conduct or behavior that is contemporaneous with the time frame when that individual reports that the sexual trauma took place. For example, one thing that we see, and unfortunately far too often because these cases continue, okay, it's not just a thing of the past, it still happens today. Situation where this person has outstanding performance ratings in service, right, all the way across the board, and all of a sudden at this particular time, the ratings take a nosedive. Okay, so what happened? Did this person just all of a sudden overnight become a lousy service member? Or did something else happen, right? That's a sign that's been traumatic happen to that person at that time in their life, okay? Sometimes you see a situation of that person for the first time in their life drinking to excess or using illegal drugs for the first time in their life. Sometimes they can get what are called layperson statements, right? Non-medical statements from someone who they talked to at that time, be it a sibling, a parent, a spouse, a clergy member, somebody who was a battle buddy of theirs in their military unit. The list goes on and on. But ways that these cases can be successful outside of the military records itself, because we know that there is unfortunately a history and tradition of military records being completely blank. Even when reports were made, right? They somehow didn't make it into the records. And this finally takes that into account. And it has been extraordinarily helpful and beneficial and righteous, I would say, on behalf of survivors of military sexual trauma to ensure that they finally, number one, get believed as they should, and number two, get the benefits that result from the trauma that they've suffered and the need for the health care that comes along with that. So that's one of many examples I can give of ways in which I've seen, just in my time doing this work, the access to benefits expand in a positive way, in a very important way.
So thank you so much, Benjamin. There's another great one and a great question from Sandra. Can the family of a Navy veteran who died 12 years ago submit a claim to utilize the PACT Act? He was on a ship off of Vietnam, almost died of a heart attack at age 50, had bypass surgery, and later died of esophageal cancer from GERD. They said, just wondering.
So I'm going to say potentially yes, and I'll clarify why I'm saying potentially yes. What we're talking about here is the potential for a benefit called dependency and indemnity compensation, or DIC for short. And one of the ways that you can gain access to that benefit as a surviving spouse or an eligible surviving child, okay, surviving minor child, would be to be able to establish that this individual passed away from a medical condition that is at least as likely as not linked to their military service. So I would have a couple of questions looking at this fact pattern to help clarify if this could be a possibility here. One is it talks about this veteran serving on a ship off of Vietnam. And so my question there, thinking back to the Blue Water Navy Veterans Act, is did that ship come within 12 nautical miles of the shoreline? And the good thing is the deck logs of these ships have been digitized, and there are ways to go back and look up, okay, this person served on the USS Smith. Okay, here's the time frame. Let's see if the deck log shows them coming within 12 nautical miles of the shoreline. If they did come within 12 nautical miles of shore at any point, that would be a person who would be presumed to have been exposed to Agent Orange. Now, I saw something in the question about heart attack, right? One of the conditions that we know about that's a presumptive condition for Agent Orange exposure is ischemic heart disease, right? That's your clogged arteries. That can lead to a heart attack. We also have, through the PACT Act, the soon-to-come addition of hypertension, which gets officially added in 2026 to the presumptive list as well. But my question then goes to the cause of death, right? Because the cause of death has to be linked to military service. And I believe that I saw in the question that the cause of death was esophageal cancer from GERD, not from the heart condition. So I'd want to know, okay, what is or was the heart condition a potential contributory cause of death? If so, that could be a pathway toward DIC. Or is there some medical way, like you heard in the story Ashton talked about earlier, to link the cancer from which the veteran passed away to the heart condition or some other Agent Orange presumptive, right? So that's what I'm saying. Potentially, yes, there definitely is the door open here toward further questions and further information that could lead toward that family getting DIC benefits. Last quick comment there is no timeline to apply for dependency and indemnity compensation. For some reason, I'm not exactly sure why, a lot of surviving spouses will self-select out of DIC benefits and say, well, too much time has passed, I can't apply. No, that's not true, okay? You can file that initial claim for dependency and indemnity compensation regardless of how many years have passed since the veteran passed away. There's not a deadline to apply.
That's awesome for people to know. We've got a few minutes left. There's a really great resource here in the chat and the Q&A, I should say, from Tommy Lamb. Please, everybody, click that link and save that before we do run out of time. And also, Dr. Cleopatra Brown shared some really great news. She submitted a claim and was denied. She appealed and was denied 3 more times. She located her primary doctor, who she was receiving care for, after returning home, and he wrote a nexus letter for her at no charge, and she is now 100% service connected after her 4th attempt. That just goes to show the power of the medical nexus letter. That's fantastic. Somebody had asked, with the PACT Act and Camp Lejeune claims, how would that affect either of these? How would either of these affect a veteran who's already 100% service connected?
Before we jump to that, Noga, I think you had a comment.
Yes, thank you. I just want to go a little bit back to the importance of our medical team when definitely in hospice when our veteran passes, and the death certificate. So I think it's critical to be aware what the presumptive health conditions are. And if it is not the terminal diagnosis, it is a contributing factor. So it's really important for us to have that knowledge right in front to be able to therefore then assist our spouses with the DIC claim, because it must be on the death certificate as either the terminal diagnosis or the contributing diagnosis to the death of our veterans. So just wanted to add that, Ashton. Thank you.
That is extraordinarily important. Thank you, Noga. I've lost track over the past several years about how many times the VA has said, oh, we see an issue here with the death certificate. First issue sometimes is the death certificate being blank, where the medical examiner's office or the coroner's office does not even fill in the cause of death. That's a big problem. And the other one is exactly as Noga was saying, looking at the cause of death and saying, okay, is there any contributory cause of death that is one of those presumptive conditions? If so, that becomes a huge help for the surviving spouse in being able to prove their claim for dependency and indemnity compensation. Yeah. Thank you for that, Noga.
Thank you so much, Noga and Benjamin. Here's a great one from Deanne. Can a medical nexus letter be written by a treating nursing practitioner or only by a physician?
It can be written by any medical professional. So definitely a treating nurse practitioner, absolutely. I will add that some of the best letters I have seen have been written by nurse practitioners as well as by physician's assistants, right? Because sometimes they are able to spend more time with the patient than the attending physician is able to. And that's fine. That's how it works sometimes in a medical facility. And so if they feel, look, I know the patient better, I know their symptomology better and the effects of their symptoms better, and if they can write the more informed or stronger letter, absolutely, and that can be extremely useful. Yes.
So we've got a couple more here. It's from Sandra again. Why is it so difficult to prove PTSD? My veteran began drinking heavily for 4 years after discharge. Motorcycle accident resulted in chronic pain for 50 years.
That case sounds compelling to me already. The big thing with PTSD is always to show the existence of an in-service stressor. And so to point out to the VA adjudicators that, in the case of the drinking, the drinking is not just because the person was willfully going out there and partying every night. No, this is a result of trauma in service. This was self-medication to try and handle the effects or dull the effects of that in-service trauma, maybe flashbacks, maybe hypervigilance, whatever the symptoms happen to be. And to really point that out as clearly as you can. And this could be a great place for a medical nexus letter that says, yes, we feel that the alcohol use here that led to the motorcycle crash, that led to the chronic pain, et cetera, that stems back to the in-service trauma.
In addition to, it's why it is so critical for in our primary care, in our clinics, for us also in the community to be aware, have a better understanding of post-traumatic stress symptoms that can present. And so then maybe we'll see them in the primary care, but we'll see what's presenting, and then we'll be able to share that information. This is what has been occurring over the years. This is what has happened, and so forth. And so we also have an obligation to know a lot more about post-traumatic stress and how it may present.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I would like to thank our panelists again, Noga and Benjamin. You've been fantastic. We got one last question. We're 1 minute over, but let's answer this for Jeffrey. Can a spouse who married a veteran after retired from active duty 29 years be eligible for DIC?
They absolutely can. The key question is, were they married at the time when the veteran passed away? As long as they were married for at least 1 year, the time when the veteran passed away, and they were still married at the time of the veteran's death, yes, that spouse can apply for and receive DIC.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everybody. Please tune in for the next Vet to Vet Cafe. This has been terrific. We're going to record this and send it out to everybody, along with some resources and including our contact information for further questions. But thank you for your support. Okay.
Thank you, Ashton.
Okay.
Thank you, Noga.
Thank you.
Toby.
Thank you both.
And most importantly, have a very thoughtful Memorial Day, everyone. Thank you so much for your support.